Hi everybody, welcome to Lico and Zone. My name is Alex Palesandro and I'm here with Alessandro Olivero. Hi Alessandro.
Hi Alex, today we talk about supercluster again, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
We will show how simple it can be to migrate an application using a supercluster topology, for example, during a cluster upgrade.
We will use the same setup of the previous video with a primary cluster, cluster A, and a couple of secondary clusters, cluster B and cluster C.
And we will use the supercluster to trigger a cloud migration from cluster B to cluster C. The application will be migrated in less than a minute from the outdated Kubernetes cluster, like cluster B, to the updated one, the cluster C.
To ensure the availability of the application, we will use the Lico service replication in order to serve the request during the migration, experiencing just a very short downtime.
Yeah, at the end of the migration, the cluster can be unpeeled and deleted, and the application will continue to serve traffic from cluster C.
What we have here, Alessandro?
We have a virtual class, small cluster on AKS that we will use as our entry point for deploying our applications. We have another AKS cluster with an older Kubernetes version that is actually running our application at the moment. We have a second cluster, updated AKS cluster that we will use as a destination for our workload.
Cluster on the left is the cluster A. We have the cluster B here, and we have the cluster. If we look to the topology we created, it's really similar to the previous one. So we have A, which is the primary cluster, and with B and C, which are the secondary cluster. B is actually running the online boutique application we have here, and we are monitoring the fact that the application is available. So let's have a look to the application. Here we are. So the application has been deployed, if I'm correct, here from the primary cluster A
Exactly.
to the secondary cluster B.
Exactly, and we are assessing the application from the service on the secondary cluster, as we can see in the DNS record.
Yeah, perfect. So let's now do the migration that we want to do. So we have an older cluster here and a newer cluster here, and we want to move the application to the new cluster.
So we can start connecting the new cluster to our primary cluster. So we have the new node. We can set a watch on our application.
So the application is running there. We have extended the application on the two clusters as we did in the last video. So the basic idea is that we have Lico demo defined on cluster A, which is extended on cluster B and on cluster C.
So now we can also access the application from the second cluster. So we can go on our DNS service and change if I copy the IP. We can change the destination IP, so it will be accessed for the second cluster. We can set the watch on our pods. Now we can look that we have to do the two remote nodes for the two clusters. So we can drain the old virtual node, that is that one. Wait a moment, the application. We can drain this node. We can see that the pods are going to the new cluster in a graceful way.
So I think we had a very short downtime and we moved the application from a cluster to another. And this is completely transparent from the user. So the user just drain a node, change the cluster, and so you have to change obviously the point where the services is accessed, but it's pretty easy to do as we saw. So the operation is finished. So now I think we can unpeer the old cluster.
Exactly. We can get the foreign cluster, so we can see which is the old cluster, and then we can remove it from our supercluster with ecostl remove cluster with the name of the cluster. Now we can see that our old node is disappeared, and we are free to remove the old cluster and use the new one.
So we can destroy the cluster from the Azure panel, and everything will go perfectly okay. So the application will continue to work.
Exactly.
Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have questions, we will be glad to answer them in the comments. Thank you, Alessandro, and see you next time.
See you.